Well, hello. I'm Bob Campbell with Alliance Solutions Group, and I'd like to share some helpful best practices on how you can re energize your local emergency planning committee. Let's get started. First, we need to recognize some of the problem, and these statistics are from the 2020 National Response Center related to hazardous material releases. In that year, there were over 22,000 hazardous material releases reported to the National Response Center. These hazardous material releases resulted in over 900 fatalities, close to 1,200 hospitalizations, about 1,600 injuries, and almost 500 evacuations affecting 22,000 people. Not only that, there was some economic impact on the communities affected, such as between 80 and 125 million in property damage alone. Now, today we have many challenges. One of them is that approximately a two-thirds of all of our fire departments are all volunteer fire departments with rather limited hazmat training and capabilities. Many of them are trained to the awareness level, while career firefighters make up about a third of all fire departments and are typically trained for primarily defensive operations in a hazardous material incident. So, how can we be better prepared to deal with hazardous material releases in our community? Well, the Local Emergency Planning Committee, or LEPC, or you may say LEPC, is one of the key resources that brings together the whole community of stakeholders within your community from the public and private sector, and they prepare and plan for any kind of hazardous material release. Now, our company has worked with over 100 local emergency planning committees over the last 20 years, and we've developed benchmark training, particularly for FEMA, in response to incidents of national significance. We've also identified several best practices that we want to share in this video with LEPCs and challenge them to take the next steps to increase both their preparedness and enhance community resilience. So let's get started. Here are a number of ways in which you could re-energize your LEPC. One would be reconvening your LEPC. Many LEPCs were impacted due to COVID and were required to shut down or stop meeting and did stop meeting. They lost momentum. Well, now is the time to bring people back in person, but also continue to offer virtual options to include a broader group of people that may not want to come back to meet in person. You can build an engaging agenda. Invite a speaker that can provide a useful training to participants or case studies from within your community. Or if you're offering a virtual option, you can contact people outside your community and have a broader access to experts that you could bring in to offer their expertise for your LAPC. Leverage your THIRA or HIRA, the threat and hazard identification or risk assessment for your community, to inform on community hazards that could impact hazmats. These days, there are lots of natural hazards such as hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, tornadoes that could impact hazardous material storage facilities and transportation routes, thereby causing cascading effects that impact your community. So utilize those resources from your emergency management office so that you can then take a look at how those things might impact and how you might need to prepare for multiple types of incidents. First responders are going to be responding to many types of incidents at once under this concept. Update your emergency response plan with industry best practices. Your emergency response plan is required by EPCRA, the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act, to be updated annually. I know that may be a hard thing to do, but as you are updating it each year, you may want to include some best practices into your plans, and I'll share a few of those here in this presentation. Train your facilities as well as the vulnerable facilities that could be impacted by EHS facilities on things like shelter in place, evacuation, and your emergency response plan. Conduct a seminar or tabletop exercise to bring stakeholders together to become more familiar with your plans and procedures in your community and to practice through an exercise and some sort of evaluation how well you are doing with exercising and responding under your emergency response plan. You can employ technology such as geographical information systems or Marplot, which is an element of the Cameo suite. It's a free product that enables you to do some pretty neat plotting on a map of the different hazards as well as facilities and other layers. And then you could take your outreach to the next level. Finally, you may want to assess the impact on socially vulnerable populations and formulate an outreach and engagement plan to address their needs. We'll take a look at some of these a little bit closer here. Well, one resource that's available to you for free, of course, is the Environmental Protection Agency's website for EPGRA online training. They've recently updated this website to include various training products and videos, as well as a resource of best practices for LEPCs. One of those best practices that I recommend using is the self assessment tool that is part of that plan. That self assessment tool will enable you to get a benchmark on where are you at from an LEPC perspective. How mature is your LEPC? How well are you doing with planning and structure and things like that? So I recommend that you use this checklist, do a self-evaluation, and then allow that self-evaluation to inform your upcoming plans for the year or coming years. Another way to re-energize your LEPC is employing the great resources of the Chemical Safety Board. The Chemical Safety Board puts out videos that are very well done that explain some of the recent incidents that have occurred and what were some of their findings and recommendations. Let's learn from the past. Let's adopt these best practices and recommendations that the Chemical Safety Board is putting out and share it in a fun way in a short video at your next LEPC meeting so that then you can see, could something like this happen in my community? And if it could, well, maybe you could take the recommendations and share those with the facilities within your community. Another way to energize your LEPC would be to do some GIS analysis. One way to do that is to use free software to do plume modeling like Aloha, which is part of the Cameo suite. What we've got shown here in the upper right hand corner is one of the models that we've exported into a map using Marplot, again, free GIS software. We've taken the plume model, we've drawn a circle around the incapacitating level because you don't know what way the wind's going to blow that day. So around this particular facility, you can see that there's some rural areas as well as some urban area, and there could be an impact on a population depending on the wind that day. So this would be a resource to help you identify populations at risk. Another resource would be to include a layer of vulnerable facilities or critical infrastructure. In the bottom right hand quadrant, I've got a rehabilitation center, a nursing home, a school, and you can now see who might be impacted by a hazardous material release on any given day. Now you've got an opportunity to do some outreach with those different facilities. You can also engage in evacuation and shelter in place zone modeling. So in the top right corner here, you can see, again, we took a plume model, drew a circle around the incapacitation area around this facility. And then in Marplot, you can identify what the population at risk is, how many people are in that area or that circle, how many housing units are in that circle, and you can use that to help you prioritize a part of your outreach plans. Another free resource is the Fast Local Emergency Evacuation Times or FLEET planning model. This is put out by the Virginia Modeling and Simulation Center at ODU. And FLEET allows you to draw a polygon around a neighborhood or an area that you might want to evacuate and determine evacuation points, which are the gray dots on that map. Along with, it will plot for you the evacuation routes. This, by the way, is one of the requirements under EPGRA for your emergency response plan, is to have a plan for evacuation. And so this will tell you how many people need to be evacuated, how long it'll take to evacuate that population, and some other useful information to help you in your planning and determining whether evacuation or shelter in place would be better for a situation. You could do that as part of your pre-incident plan and have that ready. Another way to employ these types of tools are to hold a training or workshop for the extremely hazardous substance facilities within your community so that they know, could they be affected by another facility or their own facility, and how well have they planned. You can enhance your outreach, identify and contact and educate at-risk hospitals, schools, congregant facilities, and critical infrastructure within those zones of impact. You can improve hazard awareness and planning. Have folks that are in those zones register for emergency alerts. A lot of systems require um, uh, registering in advance for some of these notifications, and they may not realize that they're in a potential hazard zone from hazardous materials. And so if they register, they'll get the alerts and warnings if needed. They can update their evacuation or sheltering and continuity plans based on knowing that they're in a threat area. Another really useful tool is EPA's Environmental Justice Screening Tool. Again, this is a free tool. You can go to the EPA website and access this tool. A couple neat features of this tool in this slide here, what I'm showing are these blue dots, which are hazardous material facilities or EPA regulated facilities in this area. And you can overlay that with various socioeconomic indicators or social vulnerability indicators and figure out where do you have populations that might be at risk, underserved populations, disadvantaged communities that could be more adversely impacted by a hazardous material incident in their community. This would help you maybe strategize outreach as well as communication methodologies and strategies and what kind of resources you might need if there's an incident in this area. Recently, there was an incident in East Palestine, Ohio. So I went on to the EPA Environmental Justice Screening Tool and I started looking at some of those socioeconomic indicators. And what we found when we took a look at this is that there was a high population of unemployment in the area that was affected by this incident. So when telling people to evacuate or leave the area. Knowing this, you would need to probably provide some additional resources for members of that community who may not have the resources themselves to evacuate themselves and seek shelter at another location. Here's another slice of this. You can see that there's a high population of elderly people in this area. This might indicate a lack of mobility or maybe a lack of ability to communicate through some of the more traditional and modern means of communication, such as broadband access. So here's another slice of it looking at a lack of broadband access. So if notices are going out or information is going out through broadband, that could be a problem. Here's another slice looking at smartphones. Not many smartphones among the elderly population in this community. So you can again see how your strategies as a local emergency planning committee or those trying to get the message out to first responders, or not only to first responders, but the community, how that might be impacted. Now, our national preparedness goal is a prepared and resilient nation. So let's talk a minute here about preparedness and resilience. So preparedness is defined through the preparedness cycle that I've shown on the slide here. It starts with a risk assessment, understanding and identifying the hazards in your community, the facilities, the hazardous transportation routes. These are all requirements of the emergency response plan. But with a good hazard analysis and risk assessment, that can inform your emergency response plan. From there, you can organize and prioritize things like pre-incident plans, who you're going to outreach with, and strategies for communication. You may decide that after you've done that risk analysis and planning that your community needs to purchase additional equipment, maybe for first responders, or that there's specific training that might be needed at medical facilities based on specific chemicals and the need to recognize signs and symptoms of exposure of those chemicals that are prevalent in your community. You can exercise to practice to ensure that all the responders and those involved in the process understand their roles, responsibilities, how to follow the plan, and then evaluate so that you can form corrective actions and make improvements. Now, resilience is another area that needs to be taken a look at. Community resilience is one of the 32 FEMA core capabilities, and there's a lot of different approaches to looking at this. But one of the things that I've recently published in this book, Crisis Ready Leadership Building Resilient Organizations and Communities, is this concept of using the 6 R's of resilience. Now, the 6 R's of resilience are shown here on the screen, and the idea is that these 6 R's of resilience may be good indicators of measuring resilience within your community. Now, they do overlap a bit and they're not all inclusive, but I think it's a good starting point to figure out, is your community robust in the face of hazmat incidents? Do you have newer infrastructure? Do you have effective response teams? Are the relationships in place among the various first responders that need to work together in case of an incident? Is your community ready? Are you prepared? Have you identified vulnerable populations and prepared them for what could happen from a hazmat incident? Are you resistant? Have you taken the measures to designate, for instance, hazmat transportation routes in your communities? Have you utilized zoning to avoid building schools and houses of worship and hospitals along rail lines or other hazmat routes or near hazmat facilities that could impact large populations? Do you have reserves in place? Do you have the adequate inventory and supply of hazmat detectors and suits and capacity for first response teams? Depth of resources that might be needed if there was an incident at any of these facilities. Repairable. How easily are you able to recover and repair after an incident? How quickly can you recover from an incident and clean up the damage? Do you have the teams and resources that are needed to come in and do the environmental cleanup? If a water system is impacted, does the community water system have a means to treat and avoid contamination? Redundant resources. Do you have access to at least maybe 2 regional hazmat teams in your community within a reasonable time frame? And are there multiple cleanup and response teams and resources in case of a widespread disaster? Are there multiple methods of emergency communication in case one system is down or broken or not very effective in reaching the population? Well, I hope these have been helpful. We've published a number of resources on our website, asg-inc.org, under our public sector menu, Local Emergency Planning Committee. We've listed all of the links that have been referred to here for all the different websites. So we hope you will go visit our website, take a look at those free resources, and share this video with someone you think might also want to benefit from some of these best practices. My contact information is on the screen. If we can be of assistance to you and your LEPC, please reach out. Thank you and have a wonderful day.